Dr. Elise rescues Biscuit, a battered French Bulldog puppy, from a taped-up box behind her clinic, vowing to save him as he wags his tail despite his pain. Through critical hours and tender care, Biscuit survives, his trust unbroken, and finds a name and purpose. By spring, Biscuit transforms from a broken soul into the clinic's heart, proving love can mend anything, one brave wag at a time. Welcome to Frenchie Tales, where the snorts, wags, and wrinkled faces of French Bulldogs bring heartwarming stories to life. Join us for tales of courage, love, and the unbreakable spirit of our four-legged friends. The morning was still clinging to the edges of night when Dr. Elise stepped out the back door of her clinic. The air in San Antonio was crisp, laced with the faint sweetness of spring blooms just starting to unfurl along the sidewalk. The sun hadn't fully risen, its first rays painting the sky in hesitant streaks of gold and grey. The street was silent, save for the soft hum of a distant delivery truck and the occasional rustle of a breeze through the clinic's patchy little garden. It was her favourite time of day, quiet, untouched, a moment to breathe before the chaos of barking dogs and worried pet parents filled her hours. She adjusted her scarf, her sneakers scuffing the pavement as she headed toward the trash bins to toss a bag of yesterday's waste. That's when she saw it. A cardboard box sat crooked against the dumpster, its edges torn and soggy, duct tape slapped across the top in a careless, jagged line. It wasn't unusual. People dumped things back here sometimes, old crates, broken leashes, even the occasional stray sock. She almost kept walking, her mind already drifting to the day ahead. Mrs. Carter's tabby needed a checkup, and the new shipment of flea meds was late. But then she heard it, a sound so faint it might have been the wind or her imagination playing tricks in the half-light. A whimper, barely a whisper, fragile as a thread about to snap. Elise froze, her breath catching in her chest. She turned toward the box, heart thudding, and took a step closer. The smell hit her first, sharp, sour, a mix of blood and filth and something heavier, something like fear baked into the damp cardboard. Her hands were already trembling as she knelt down, the knees of her jeans soaking into the cold ground. She reached for the box, pulling it toward her with a scrape that echoed in the stillness. The duct tape resisted, sticky and stubborn, but she clawed at it, peeling back the top flap with a rip that felt too loud, too final. And there he was. Biscuit, if she'd known his name then, wasn't moving much. A French Bulldog puppy, no more than 8 weeks old, his tiny body curled into a ball that barely filled half the box. His wrinkled face, usually so full of charm, in his breed was bruised and smudged with grime, one ear torn at the tip like someone had yanked it too hard. His fur, patchy and thin, clung to a frame so frail she could see the outline of his ribs, his spine a row of sharp little peaks. One big round eye was swollen shut, a dark purple bloom spreading across it, and a gash ran along his back, crusted with dried blood. He was a wreck, a discarded thing left to fade beside the trash. Elise's throat burned, her vision blurring as she sucked in a shaky breath. She'd seen hurt animals before, car accidents, fights, neglect, but this was different. This was a deliberate kind of broken. Then it happened. His tail, short and stubby like all Frenchies have, moved. The tiniest twitch, a flicker so small she might have missed it if she hadn't been staring, holding her breath like the world depended on it. It wasn't a wag, not yet, just a broken signal, a whisper of life saying, "Please still love me." Elise choked on the air, a sob catching halfway up her chest. Her hands hovered over him, afraid to touch, afraid he'd shatter under her fingers. "Hey, little guy," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You're okay now. I've got you." He didn't cry, didn't flinch, just lay there, his shallow breaths fogging the cold air in faint puffs. She reached in slowly, her fingers brushing his matted fur, and his head shifted just a fraction toward her touch. One paw, smaller than her thumb, lifted slightly, trembling like it took everything he had. Even then, even in that box, he tried. Elise's heart splintered. She'd seen dogs fight to live, but this was something else. This was trust, raw and unearned, offered up by a soul that should have given up long before she found him. She didn't think twice. She shrugged off her hoodie, the soft grey one she'd worn all winter, and wrapped him in it, cradling his fragile weight against her chest. He was so cold, so light, like he might slip away if she didn't hold tight. Enough! She didn't walk, she ran, her sneakers pounding the pavement as she burst through the clinic's back door, past the front desk where her tech, Jamie, looked up with wide eyes, past the rows of kennels still quiet in the early hour. She hit the exam table in a blur, laying him down gently, her hoodie still tucked around him like a shield. "Stay with me, buddy," she murmured, her hands already moving, grabbing a stethoscope, a blanket, anything to keep that faint heartbeat going. His big bat-like ears twitched once, and she swore right then. This little Frenchie wasn't going to die thinking the world didn't want him. Elise's hands moved like they'd done this 1,000 times, though her heart felt like it was tripping over itself. The clinic's exam room was a flurry of motion, stainless steel glinting under the harsh lights, the beep of a monitor cutting through the silence she'd left outside. She unwrapped Biscuit from her hoodie, his tiny body, limp against the table, and her stomach twisted at the sight. His breathing was shallow, raspy little gasps that barely lifted his chest. His gums were pale, almost white, and his skin felt like ice beneath her fingers. But he was alive. That was all that mattered right now. She worked on instinct, muscle, memory kicking in where panic tried to take over. She hooked up an IV line, her fingers steady as she slid the needle into his frail leg, delivering fluids to coax his body back from the edge. Oxygen flowed through a tiny mask she pressed gently over his wrinkled snout, and she grabbed a syringe of pain meds, whispering, "This'll help, little man. Just hang on." Jamie, her tech, burst through the door, her ponytail swinging and eyes wide. "What happened?" she gasped, freezing at the sight of the battered pup. "I don't know," Elise said, her voice tight. "Found him in a box by the dumpster. Someone threw him away." She glanced up, meeting Jamie's gaze, and added softer, "But he still wagged his tail." Jamie's hand flew to her mouth, but she nodded, jumping in to help, grabbing warm blankets, prepping a heating pad. They were a team, a quiet storm racing against time. The first few hours were a tightrope walk. Elise hovered over Biscuit, her shadow falling across his tiny form as she checked his vitals every few minutes. Every beep of the monitor felt like a plea. "Steady, steady, don't stop." She cleaned his wounds with careful hands, the gash on, his back oozing and raw, left untreated for days, maybe longer. Infection had set in, a sickly heat radiating from it. His back right leg was fractured, the bone misaligned in a way that made her jaw clench. It wasn't an accident. Someone had done this. Someone had hurt him on purpose. But Biscuit didn't whimper, didn't pull away. He just lay there, his big round eyes half closed, breathing like it cost him everything. Then, as she adjusted the IV, it happened. His paws, small enough to fit in her palm, lifted again, trembling, reaching toward her. Elise froze, her throat burning as tears pricked her eyes. Even now, broken and betrayed, he tried. He trusted. "You're a fighter, aren't you?" she whispered, her voice shaking. "I'm not letting you go, buddy. You're not trash. Not to me." She leaned closer, her forehead nearly touching his, and made a silent vow. This little Frenchie wouldn't slip away thinking the world had given up on him. Not while she had breath left to fight for him. The clock ticked on, each minute a battle won or lost. Jamie stayed too, her usual chatter replaced by a fierce focus as she monitored Biscuit's temperature. Outside, the sun climbed higher, but inside, time blurred into a single desperate hope. "Stay with me." Biscuit's chest rose and fell, fragile but stubborn, and Elise clung to that rhythm like a lifeline. She didn't know if he'd make it through the night, but she knew one thing. He wasn't alone anymore, and neither was she. The day stretched into a haze of beeps and bandages, but as the sun dipped low, painting the clinic windows in soft amber, something shifted. Elise sat beside Biscuit, her elbows on her knees, watching his tiny chest rise and fall. The fluids were working. His gums had a faint pink tinge now, and his breathing, though still weak, wasn't as ragged. She'd lost track of how many times she'd whispered to him, her voice a steady thread in the quiet. "You're safe now, little man, just hold on." Jamie had gone home, the clinic settling into an eerie stillness, but Elise couldn't leave. Not yet. Then it happened. Biscuit's head twitched, a slow, deliberate movement, and his eyes, those big, round, Frenchie eyes, opened. One was still swollen, clouded with bruising, but the other, clear and dark, found hers. He held her gaze, unblinking, like he was searching for something, safety maybe, or an answer to why he was here. Elise's breath caught, her hands trembling as she reached out, brushing his wrinkled forehead. "Hey, buddy," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. And there it was again, that stubby tail, flicking softly, stronger than before. Not a full wag, not yet, but a sign, a spark. She lost it then, right there beside the table, tears spilling hot down her cheeks. Not because he was hurt, she'd seen worse, but because he still believed. After everything, he still tried to trust. She wiped her face with her sleeve, leaning close. "You don't know it yet, but you're never alone again." The words felt like a promise, heavy and true. She stayed there, her hand resting lightly on his side, until a knock at the back door jolted her upright. Frowning, she glanced at Biscuit. He didn't flinch, just watched her, and crossed the room, peering through the peephole. A skinny teenager stood outside, hoodie pulled low, hands shoved deep in his pockets. He shifted nervously, eyes red-rimmed like he hadn't slept in days. Elise opened the door a crack. "We're closed," she said, cautious but soft. The boy, Milo, she'd learn later, bit his lip, glancing past her toward the exam room. Is that the puppy from the box?" His voice cracked, raw with something she couldn't place. Her stomach dropped. She nodded slowly, stepping aside. "You know something?" Milo looked at the floor, scuffing his sneaker against the pavement. "It was my stepdad," he mumbled. He was gonna drown him. Said he was too loud, too much trouble. I couldn't let that happen, so I wrapped him in a blanket and left him here. Didn't know where else to go." The confession hung between them, heavy as the dusk settling outside. Elise stood still, processing, then said quietly, "You saved his life." Milo's head snapped up, eyes wide with guilt and a flicker of hope. "He wagged his tail," he said almost to himself. "Even after everything, I thought maybe he'd make it." Elise swallowed hard, nodding. "He's a fighter, and he's mine now." She paused, then smiled through the ache in her chest. "His name's Biscuit." Milo's lips twitched, the ghost of a smile. "Biscuit," he echoed. "Yeah," she said, glancing back at the pup, who tilted his head at the sound of her voice. "Because he's small and sweet, and because he lived long enough to find the right person." Milo nodded, slow and deliberate, like he was handing Biscuit over for good. "He's lucky," he said. Elise's smile widened, bittersweet. "No, he's Biscuit, and we're the lucky ones." That night, she didn't go home. She dragged a pile of old blankets into the corner of the recovery room, making a nest just feet from Biscuit's cage. She left the door cracked open so he could see her, his one good eye tracking her every move. "I'm staying," she told him, settling in. "You're not alone anymore." He blinked slowly, a long, tired blink, and she knew he understood. Not the words, maybe, but the weight of her presence. In the quiet, she found herself talking, telling him about her first dog, a scrappy mutt named Pip, and the day she'd opened this clinic with nothing but hope and a beat-up stethoscope. Biscuit didn't answer, of course, but his stillness felt like listening. And in that moment, he wasn't just a puppy in a box. He was hers, and he had a name, a future, and a fight worth winning. The days after Biscuit's first fragile signs of life melted into a quiet rhythm of recovery, each one a testament to his stubborn will. Elise moved him from the stark recovery cage to a cozy nook in the back of the clinic, a small room with a window cracked open to let in the spring breeze. A soft dog bed perched atop a heating pad that hummed with gentle warmth. His gash, once an angry red slash across his back, was closing under a regimen of antibiotics, the infection retreating like a tide pulling back from shore. His fractured leg, still braced in a tiny splint, didn't stop him from trying. Every wobble a small rebellion against the pain he'd endured. Elise watched him like a hawk, her days blurring into a cycle of medications, monitoring, and whispered encouragements. "You've got this, Biscuit. You're stronger than you know." One morning, as sunlight spilled through the window, painting the floor in golden patches, Biscuit lifted his head when she entered. His bat-like ears, one torn, one perfect, perked unevenly, and his big round eyes tracked her across the room. His tail, still weak from weeks of stillness, gave a cautious wag, not the wild, carefree flutter of a healthy pup, but a deliberate flick, like he was dipping a paw into the waters of joy, testing if it was safe. Elise crouched beside him, her knees pressing into the cool tile, and grinned. "Look at you, little man, you're coming back to me." He tilted his head, a wrinkle deepening on his forehead, and she swore she saw a spark, faint, but there, lighting up his gaze. He started measuring safety in inches. She'd sit by his bed, cross-legged on the floor, and he'd inch closer, his splinted leg dragging slightly as he scooted across the blanket. One afternoon she brought her lunch, a turkey sandwich wrapped in crinkly foil, and settled beside him. His nose twitched, those soulful eyes following her hands as she unwrapped it. "Hungry, huh?" she asked, breaking off a small piece of turkey and holding it out in her palm. He stared, his breath puffing soft against her skin, then stretched his neck, slow, so slow, until his teeth grazed her fingers, taking the morsel with a gentleness that made her chest ache. She didn't move, didn't breathe, just let the moment hang there, sacred and unspoken. He chewed, swallowed, then rested his chin on her knee, a quiet trust settling between them. Word of Biscuit's survival spread beyond the clinic walls, carried on whispers and shared posts online. One day a woman named Clara stepped in, her elderly Labrador hobbling beside her on stiff legs. She was in her 60s maybe, her grey hair pulled back in a loose bun, her eyes kind but shadowed with loss. She'd come for a routine checkup, but her gaze drifted through the glass wall to Biscuit, who lay curled on his bed, watching the world with cautious curiosity. "Is that the puppy from the news?" she asked, her voice soft as a sigh. Elise nodded, adjusting a chart. "That's him." Clara pressed a hand to her chest, stepping closer. "He's smaller than I thought," she said, tears brimming. "And so beautiful." Biscuit tilted his head, his good ear flopping, and gave a sleepy tail flick. Clara's breath hitched. "My husband and I lost our dog 2 years ago. Said no more, too hard to lose them, but now." She trailed off, watching him, and Elise saw it, a crack in the wall she'd built, letting hope seep through. Later, that week Milo returned. The teenager shuffled through the door, a cardboard box tucked under his arm, his hoodie pulled low over his eyes. "Got a part-time job," he mumbled, setting it down. Treats, blankets, a plush toy shaped like a bone, all brand new. "Wanted to help." Elise smiled, but before she could speak, Biscuit limped toward him, his splint tapping the floor. He sniffed Milo's hand, then sat close enough for their knees to brush. Milo crouched, his voice trembling. "Hey, little dude." Biscuit leaned into him, a solid weight against his leg, and the boy broke, silent tears streaking his cheeks, his shoulders shaking. Elise stayed quiet, letting them have it. This wasn't just about a puppy, it was healing, raw and real, for a kid who'd carried guilt like a second skin. The next day brought a mother and her daughter, Sophie, a slight girl of 8, with dark curls and a stuffed dog clutched tight. "She saw Biscuit's picture online," the mother said, her voice gentle but strained. "Hasn't talked much since. Some things happened. But she whispered his name. First word in months." Elise's heart thudded, a mix of awe and nerves. 5 minutes, she agreed, leading them to the back. Biscuit waddled in, his tail low but wagging, and Sophie sat cross-legged on the floor, watching. He sniffed her toy, then lay beside her, their shoulders touching. She looked up, eyes wide, and whispered, "He's soft." Her mother gasped, a hand flying to her mouth, and Elise nearly dropped to her knees. Biscuit rested his head on Sophie's legs, and she stroked his back, peace blooming in her small frame like a flower unfurling after a long winter. By the end of the second week, Biscuit could stand, just for a moment, wobbling like a newborn deer, but he stood. Elise's staff paused, holding their breath as he teetered on the foam ramp she'd built from supply room scraps. He took 2 steps, stopped, and looked at her. "Did I do good?" "Perfect," she said, crouching low, her voice thick. "You're perfect." He took another step, then flopped down, tongue lolling, and the room erupted in soft cheers. Outside, the San Antonio spring hummed with life. Kids on bikes, flowers bursting along the sidewalk, and Biscuit's quiet fight carried something more, a promise. He wasn't just healing his body, he was mending hearts, one cautious wag at a time, proving that even the smallest souls could shift the world. The clinic had seen its share of chaos, but that Tuesday felt different. Elise was stacking charts, the day winding down, when the front door banged open. A man stumbled in, his face slick with sweat, a trembling dachshund clutched tight against his chest. "Car hit him 2 blocks away," he choked out, voice raw with panic. The little dog's legs dangled limp, its whimpers piercing the quiet. Elise dropped everything, her team snapping into motion like a well-oiled machine. Vitals called out, bandages grabbed, the exam table prepped in seconds. She was at the dog's side, hands steady, assessing injuries, when she felt a warm press against her leg. Biscuit. No leash, no command. He'd slipped in from the back room, his splintered leg barely slowing his determined waddle. The French Bulldog sat beside the table, his big round eyes locked on the injured dachshund, calm and unblinking. The little dog stiffened, a pained cry escaping, until Biscuit leaned forward slow and sure and touched noses with him. The whimper stopped. The dachshund's body eased, a stillness settling over the room like a held breath. Elise glanced down, her hands pausing mid-motion, and saw it. Biscuit's stubby tail flicking softly, a quiet anchor in the storm. The man, who'd been pacing and muttering prayers, froze. His eyes darted to Biscuit, recognition flickering. "That's him, isn't it, from the video, Lucky?" Elise nodded, adjusting the IV line. "Biscuit," he exhaled, a shaky sound. "I saw his story online. Puppy in a box, left to die. Kept me going today. Thought if that little guy could make it, maybe mine could too." Her chest tightened, a lump rising in her throat. She didn't respond, just kept working, but the words sank deep. Biscuit wasn't just surviving. He was a lifeline, a spark of hope for strangers he'd never met. They stabilized the dachshund, broken ribs, a bruised lung, but alive. And Biscuit stayed, sitting vigil until its eyes fluttered open hours later, a silent promise kept. That night, the clinic fell quiet again. Elise locked the door, turned off the lights, and sank to the floor beside the front desk. Biscuit waddled over, curling into her lap, his head resting heavy against her chest. She stroked his now glossy fur, the wrinkles on his face soft under her fingers. "I used to think I saved you," she whispered, her voice catching. "But now I know you saved all of us." His tail tapped the floor once, twice, steady as a heartbeat, and she felt it, the circle complete. He wasn't the broken pup she'd pulled from that box. He was the clinic's heart, a miracle with snorts and soul, his scars a map of where he'd been, not where he was going. Weeks passed, and Biscuit claimed his new life fully. One morning, Elise grabbed his leash, more for show than need, and took him outside. The San Antonio spring was in full bloom, grass lush underfoot, the air thick with the scent of flowers and the distant laughter of kids on bikes. Biscuit stepped onto the lawn behind the clinic, his paws sinking into the earth, and froze. His nose twitched, sniffing furiously. Then he lifted his face to the wind, eyes wide like he was tasting something forgotten. Freedom, maybe, or the promise of a world that wouldn't hurt him again. Elise sat on a bench, patting the spot beside her. "Come here, partner." He jumped up, a little clumsy but proud, and leaned into her chest, his warmth seeping through her shirt. "You're not lucky," she murmured, burying her face in his fur. "You're a miracle." A woman passing by paused, her dog a shaggy mutt, tugging at its leash. She smiled, eyes glistening. "That's him, isn't it? The little guy from the story?" Elise nodded, scratching Biscuit's ears. "He made it," the woman said, crouching to meet his gaze. Biscuit tilted his head, giving her a sleepy glance. then pressed closer to Elise, his safe place. "I don't get how someone could do that to a puppy," she whispered. Elise didn't argue, just ran her hand along Biscuit's back. "And yet he trusts us," she said. The woman nodded, wiping her face, and walked on, leaving them in the golden light. That evening, Elise made a decision. She packed up Biscuit's bed, his toys, and drove home, not to the clinic but to her little house on the edge of town. No crate waited by the door. Instead, Biscuit followed her inside, his nails clicking on the hardwood, and climbed right into bed. He curled behind her knees, a tight ball of warmth, his snorts filling the silence. "Welcome home, Biscuit," she whispered, his tail thumping once against her leg, steady, quiet, full of everything. He couldn't say. She lay there, staring at the ceiling, and realized he'd become everything. A comfort to Sophie, who'd found her voice. A lifeline for Milo, who'd found purpose. A spark for Clara, who'd opened her heart again. Even the clinic's patients, dogs trembling with fear, calmed when Biscuit sat beside them. His gentle nudge a balm no medicine could match. One afternoon, a young vet tech, Mia, came for an interview, nervous and fresh from school. When Elise asked why she chose this path, Mia glanced at Biscuit, curled by her chair. "I saw his story months ago," she said, voice soft. "It changed everything. I knew I had to be part of something like that." Biscuit stood, resting his head on her foot, and Mia's eyes welled up. Elise hired her on the spot. No words needed. Later, under a sky streaked with orange and pink, Elise took Biscuit to a park. He trotted ahead, sniffing leaves and benches, then turned to her, his uneven ears flopping, tongue lolling in a grin. She sat on the grass and he flopped beside her, belly exposed to the sun. "You rebuilt us," she said, her voice breaking. "Me, Milo, Sophie, all of us." He didn't move, just sighed, deep and peaceful, and she knew. Broken didn't mean ruined. Biscuit had taken the pain he'd been given and turned it into purpose, one brave wag at a time. He was home, he was loved, and he'd made her believe in miracles again.